The dog was already slipping when Ethan Calloway reached the edge. 30 feet below, the canyon swallowed light and sound, and a German shepherd hung from a jagged cliff, one hind leg twisted in a steel snare, claws scraping helplessly against frozen stone. Snow blew sideways, pebbles fell. The dog didn't howl anymore. He had seen that look before. Years ago, a Marine had dangled from a shattered rooftop in Fallujah, fingers bleeding, eyes locked on Ethan's, trusting him. Ethan had reached then too, and he had been too late. Now the wind howled again. The shepherd's amber eyes lifted toward him, not wild, not broken, waiting. He could walk away. He lived alone for a reason. No more promises, no more hands slipping through his. But if he walked away, he would hear that silence for the rest of his life. So he dropped to his knees, tied the rope around his waist, and crawled toward the edge. Because sometimes the life you refuse to save becomes the life that saves you. Would you have reached for that dog? If this story touches your heart, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes no one should be left behind. Durango, Colorado wore winter like an old soldier wears a faded uniform, quietly, without complaint. Snow clung to the roofs of narrow storefronts along Main Avenue, and the Animas River moved dark and steady beneath a thin veil of ice. The San Juan Mountains stood tall and indifferent, their ridges carved by wind and time. It was late afternoon when the wind began to sharpen. Ethan Calloway preferred it that way. At 47, Ethan moved with the controlled economy of someone who had learned to conserve energy long ago. He was tall, 6'2", with a broad, weathered frame that had not softened despite the years. His hair, once dark brown, had thinned into streaks of gray at the temples. A faint scar traced along his jawline, not dramatic enough to invite questions, but permanent enough to carry memory. His eyes were steel blue, steady and distant, like someone always watching for something that might never come. He wore a thick flannel shirt beneath a worn canvas jacket, heavy boots crunching over frozen gravel as he followed the upper trail near the Animas Gorge. Ethan volunteered to check trail markers during winter closures. He told people it kept him busy. The truth was simpler. Solitude was easier than people. The wind carried the scent of pine and cold stone when he heard it. A bark. Not loud, not sharp, strained. Ethan stopped mid-step. Another bark followed, hoarse and scraping, swallowed by the wind. He turned slowly toward the sound, scanning the cliff line that dropped sharply into the canyon. Snow dusted the ledges. The gorge below fell 30 feet into jagged rock and frozen brush. Then he saw movement. A shape clung to the side of the cliff, half hidden beneath a narrow ledge. It was a German shepherd. The dog hung precariously, its front paws hooked desperately into a thin strip of rock. One hind leg twisted unnaturally backward, caught in a steel cable snare anchored higher up. The metal glinted in the fading light. The dog's body trembled with effort. Its claws scraped stone, sending small pebbles bouncing into the canyon. Ethan's pulse quickened. The shepherd was large, 80 to 90 pounds at least, its coat thick sable and black, dusted with frost. Its ears stood erect despite exhaustion, and its muzzle was dusted with white. Not young, but not old either. Maybe 5 or 6 years, prime working age. Its chest heaved. It did not howl. It stared up. Their eyes met, amber, clear, not wild, not panicked, waiting. Something tightened inside Ethan's chest. He stepped closer to the edge and dropped to one knee. There were boot prints in the snow above the snare, human prints. Fresh. One set heavy, deep, another lighter. Near them were scuff marks, drag lines in the snow where something had been forced downhill. The shepherd had not wandered into that trap. It had been chased. The wind gusted, rocking the dog's body outward for a terrifying second. Its front claws slipped, scraping down the rock before digging in again. Ethan's breath caught. He had seen that posture before. Years ago, in Fallujah, a building had collapsed under mortar fire. Concrete dust had choked the air. A young Marine named Cole Martinez had dangled from the edge of a shattered floor, fingers bleeding as he tried to pull himself up. Ethan had reached for him through smoke and falling debris. Cole's eyes had locked on his, trusting. Then the floor gave way. Ethan had reached. He had been too late. The canyon wind roared. The shepherd's claws slipped again. Pebbles rattled down the cliff face. "Hold on," Ethan muttered, though he didn't know if he was speaking to the dog or to someone else entirely. He moved quickly now, shrugging off his pack and pulling free a coil of rope he always carried when hiking near the gorge. Habit. Marine training never fully left. He anchored the rope around a thick juniper trunk growing near the edge, looping it twice, knotting it with practiced precision. His hands were steady. They always were in moments like this. It was afterward that the shaking came. He secured the rope around his waist, testing the tension. Below, the shepherd's breathing grew ragged. Its back legs strained against the cable. Blood stained its fur where the metal had cut through skin. Ethan lowered himself to his stomach and crawled toward the cliff edge. The drop yawned beneath him. "Easy," he said softly, voice low and firm. "Easy, boy." The dog's ears twitched at the sound of his voice. Up close, Ethan could see more detail. A collar, black leather, worn and cracked, metal plate bolted to the side. He shifted slightly, bracing his boots against rock, leaning far enough to read it. Ranger, Unit M17. The name struck him harder than the wind. M17. He knew that designation. A federal tactical K9 unit disbanded 3 years ago after budget restructuring and internal review. He remembered reading a short article about it in the local paper. The unit had been praised for search and rescue and high-risk apprehensions. Then it was gone. The shepherd's leg trembled violently. The cable tightened. Ethan snapped back into motion. "Stay with me," he said. He eased himself down just far enough to reach the cable with one hand, while gripping the ledge with the other. The rope dug into his waist as gravity pulled at him. The shepherd flinched when Ethan's fingers brushed the snare. "It's okay," he murmured. "I'm not here to hurt you." The dog's eyes never left his. Not fear. Focus. Trust. Ethan pulled a folding knife from his belt and sawed carefully at the steel cable. The metal was thick, frayed from strain but not yet broken. Each movement caused the dog to sway. He forced his breathing slow. The wind pressed against his back. The canyon below seemed to stretch endlessly. He cut deeper. The cable snapped with a sharp metallic twang. For one terrifying heartbeat, the shepherd dropped. Ethan lunged forward, catching a fistful of thick fur at the scruff of its neck. The dog's body slammed against the cliff face. Its claws clawed for purchase. "Climb!" Ethan shouted. The shepherd responded instantly. It dug its front paws into the rock and pushed upward, using its uninjured leg to gain leverage. Ethan strained, muscles screaming as he hauled with everything he had. For a moment, the world narrowed to weight, rope, and breath. Then a paw hooked over the ledge. Another. Ethan leaned backward, bracing his boots, and pulled. The shepherd rolled onto solid ground beside him, gasping. Ethan collapsed onto his back, staring at the pale winter sky. Silence followed, except for the wind and the dog's labored breathing. After a few seconds, Ethan rolled onto his side. The shepherd lay still, chest rising and falling rapidly. Its coat was thick and strong, body powerful even through exhaustion. A faint scar cut across its shoulder. Old, healed, working dog. Slowly the dog lifted its head. It turned toward Ethan. Their eyes met again. Closer now. Up close, the shepherd's face carried a quiet dignity, not the wild tension of a stray, not the softness of a house pet. This was a trained animal, disciplined. Its gaze held something almost human, not gratitude, recognition. Ethan sat up slowly. "You don't belong in a snare," he said quietly. He reached out cautiously. The shepherd did not pull away. Instead, it lowered its head slightly, allowing his hand to brush the thick fur behind its ear. Warm, alive, real. Ethan swallowed. For years, he had avoided attachments. People left, or worse. But this dog had been hunted. The boot prints in the snow were not from a casual hiker. Someone had chased it to the edge. Ethan stood and scanned the tree line. The forest was quiet now. Too quiet. He looked back down at the collar. Ranger, Unit M17. The name felt deliberate, intentional. Why would a trained canine end up in a poacher's snare near an abandoned section of canyon? Why had someone followed it here? And why did it look at him like it had chosen him? The wind shifted. Ranger struggled to stand but faltered, weight shifting off the injured leg. Ethan stepped closer instinctively, catching the dog's shoulder before it fell. The shepherd did not resist his touch. "All right," Ethan said softly. "You're not dying on this mountain." He slipped the rope free from his waist and coiled it slowly. The canyon loomed behind them, silent witness to a narrow escape. As he glanced once more at the human tracks in the snow, a cold thought slid through him. Someone had set that trap intentionally, and someone might still be watching. He looked down at Ranger. The shepherd met his gaze steadily. Not broken, not afraid, waiting. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Who were you running from?" he murmured. The wind carried no answer, only the distant echo of the canyon, and a question that would not leave him. Why would a professional canine be hunted like a wild animal? The trail back to Ethan's cabin wound through dense pine forest, snow crunching beneath heavy boots and padded paws. The late afternoon light had thinned into a muted gray. The sky stretched low and heavy over the mountains. Ranger limped but kept pace beside him, refusing to be carried. The shepherd's injured leg bled lightly through matted fur, yet the dog's posture remained upright, head high, ears alert. Ethan noticed that. Most strays would have bolted the second they reached flat ground. Fear made animals unpredictable, but Ranger stayed close, glancing up at Ethan occasionally, as if confirming direction. "You don't trust Easy," Ethan muttered, half to himself. "Good." The cabin sat a mile off the main dirt road, tucked against a slope where pine trees shielded it from passing traffic. It was a modest structure, weathered timber walls, a metal roof that groaned when snow shifted, and a wide front porch that faced the tree line. Smoke rarely rose from its chimney unless temperatures dropped sharply. Ethan kept the place simple, functional, uncomplicated. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of cedar and black coffee. Ethan pushed the door open and stepped aside, watching Ranger carefully. "Your move," he said. Ranger paused at the threshold. His amber eyes scanned the interior, nostrils flaring. He stepped in slowly, favoring his injured leg, but there was no hesitation, only calculation. The shepherd's body language was controlled, disciplined. This was not a dog unused to entering unfamiliar structures. He made a slow circle around the small living room, inspecting corners, sniffing the air near the wood stove, glancing toward the hallway. Only after completing what looked suspiciously like a perimeter check did he lower himself near the center of the room. Ethan shut the door behind them. Snow rattled softly against the windows. "All right," he said quietly. "You can stay a few days. That's it." He said it out loud, as if saying it might make it true. He retrieved a clean towel and a small first aid kit from beneath the kitchen sink. Ranger lifted his head when Ethan approached, but did not retreat. Up close, Ethan could see the wound more clearly now, a deep abrasion where the cable had bitten into muscle. Not broken, just torn and inflamed. "This'll sting." Ranger's ears flicked, but he did not move. Ethan cleaned the wound slowly, his hands firm but gentle. Ranger flinched once when antiseptic touched raw tissue, but he did not snap. He did not growl. He watched, always watching. "You're not a stray," Ethan murmured. Up close, the shepherd's coat bore the faint signs of disciplined grooming once maintained regularly. The muscles along his shoulders were strong, symmetrical. His teeth were clean, his gaze steady, a working dog. "Ranger," Ethan read again from the collar. The name felt oddly fitting. He finished bandaging the leg and stood. "You sleep there," he said, gesturing toward a folded blanket near the stove. "Not in my room." Ranger remained where he was, eyes following Ethan. It unsettled him. Years ago, Ethan had learned that being watched meant being measured. In Iraq, that could mean the difference between life and death. You scanned rooftops, windows, shadows. Now, in his own cabin, he felt evaluated by a dog. "Don't start," he muttered to himself. He poured kibble into a metal bowl, left over from a bag he kept for coyotes that sometimes wandered too close. He placed it on the floor. Ranger approached but did not eat immediately. Instead, he sniffed the food, then looked up at Ethan, as if waiting. "You want permission?" Ethan scoffed. Ranger lowered his head and began eating slowly, without urgency. No desperation, no gulping. Disciplined. That word again. Ethan leaned against the counter, arms folded. He had lived alone for nearly 8 years. After returning home, he had tried, briefly, to reintegrate. There had been a job at a security firm, a short-lived relationship with a woman named Claire, who had gentle hands and too much patience. She had once told him he flinched in his sleep, like someone still ducking from gunfire. She left when she realized he wasn't coming back, not fully. Ethan had not blamed her. Survivor's guilt was a quiet thing. It didn't shout, it whispered. It told you that you didn't deserve peace, that someone else had earned it more. Cole Martinez had been 23. Ethan had been the squad leader. Leaders don't lose men. That was the rule. He pushed the memory aside and moved toward the fireplace, feeding it 2 small logs. The cabin warmed slowly. Ranger finished eating and limped toward the front door. Ethan stiffened. "You're not going anywhere." But Ranger did not paw at the door. He stood facing it, still, ears forward, listening. The silence stretched. Outside, the wind shifted again. Ethan felt it then, a subtle change in the air, the kind you only noticed if you had trained yourself to notice everything. He stepped closer to the window and pulled the curtain aside slightly. Nothing, just trees and snow. Ranger remained at the door, not barking, not whining, watching. Hours passed. The sky darkened completely. The temperature dropped sharply, frost etching delicate patterns along the glass. Ethan sat in a worn armchair, reading an old paperback he had already read twice. Ranger lay near the door, head resting on paws, but eyes open. At 10:30, the sound came. An engine, low, distant. Ethan's head lifted instantly. The dirt road that led to his cabin was rarely used at night. It ended near the canyon trailhead, no through traffic. The engine grew louder, tires crunching over frozen gravel. Ranger rose silently. He did not bark. He did not rush the door. He stood square, muscles taut, a low rumble building in his chest. Not panic, recognition. Ethan moved toward the window again, keeping lights dim behind him. Through the trees, headlights cut briefly across the snow. A dark pickup truck, older model. No visible company markings. It drove slowly, too slowly. Ethan's jaw tightened. The truck passed the narrow driveway entrance to his cabin, continued another 30 yards, then idled for a moment before reversing slightly. Ranger's growl deepened, still controlled, almost restrained. The truck's engine revved once, then it continued down the road and disappeared beyond the bend. Silence returned. Ethan waited a full minute before lowering the curtain. "You know that sound," he said quietly to Ranger. The shepherd's gaze remained fixed on the door long after the engine faded. "You're not running from random hikers," Ethan continued. Ranger turned his head slightly, eyes meeting Ethan's again. That same steady look, as if confirming something. Ethan exhaled slowly. He walked to the door and checked the lock, then the back window, then the small shed outside through the side pane. Clear. When he returned to the center of the room, Ranger had not moved from his post. "You don't trust Easy," Ethan said again, softer this time. He grabbed a folded blanket from a nearby chair and tossed it closer to the door. "If you're staying there, at least stay warm." Ranger glanced down at the blanket, but did not lie on it. Instead, he positioned himself directly in front of the door, body angled protectively toward the interior of the cabin. Guarding. Ethan felt something shift inside him. For years he had guarded emptiness. Now something guarded him. He moved toward the hallway, pausing briefly. "You're not mine," he said firmly, "and I'm not yours." He left the light near the stove burning low and walked into his bedroom. The door remained slightly ajar. He lay on the bed fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep did not come easily anymore, not since the dreams had begun. But tonight, the sound outside was different. No gunfire, no collapsing buildings, just wind through trees. And once, faintly, the crunch of tires far down the road again. Ethan's eyes opened instantly. He sat up and listened. Nothing more. After several minutes, he rose quietly and stepped into the hallway. Ranger remained at the door, awake, watching. Ethan stood there longer than he meant to. "You don't sleep?" he asked softly. Ranger's ears flicked, but his gaze did not waver from the tree line beyond the door. The shepherd was not restless. He was waiting. For what? For who? Ethan leaned his shoulder against the wall. The thought came uninvited. This dog wasn't lost. He was holding position, and someone out there knew exactly where he was. The wind pushed snow against the cabin again. Ethan walked back toward his bedroom but stopped halfway. "Just a few days," he said quietly into the dim light. That's all. He didn't know whether he was promising the dog or himself. Outside, the mountains remained silent. Inside, 2 soldiers, one human, one canine, kept watch. And somewhere beyond the trees, something unfinished waited in the dark. Morning arrived without warmth. The sky was a pale sheet of iron, the mountains veiled in low cloud. Frost clung to the cabin windows, and the world beyond them seemed suspended in a cold, watchful silence. Ethan woke before dawn, as he always did. For a moment, he lay still, orienting himself. No explosions, no shouting, just wind brushing the siding. Then he heard it, a soft, persistent scratching at his bedroom door. Not frantic, intentional. He sat up immediately. "All right," he muttered. When he stepped into the main room, Ranger was already at the door, body rigid but not agitated. His tail was low, ears forward, gaze fixed outside. "You've been waiting," Ethan observed. Ranger glanced at him briefly, just long enough to confirm attention, then turned back toward the door. Ethan pulled on his boots and shrugged into his canvas jacket. The moment the door opened, Ranger stepped out into the snow and paused only long enough to confirm Ethan was behind him. Then he moved, not limping anymore, not fully. The bandaged leg still favored the ground, but whatever urgency burned in him seemed stronger than pain. "Hey," Ethan called softly. "Slow down." Ranger did not slow. He moved with purpose, nose low to the ground, weaving through the trees beyond the cabin's clearing. He did not wander. He followed a direct line. Ethan followed at a steady pace, eyes scanning the surroundings. "You're not chasing a rabbit," he murmured. They moved deeper into the forest, toward the upper ridge where the canyon narrowed, and an abandoned silver mine rested in quiet decay. The mine had closed decades ago, after a collapse claimed 3 workers. Since then, it stood empty, its entrance boarded, the old access road eroded by time. Ethan hadn't been up there in months. Ranger led without hesitation. As they approached the mine's perimeter, Ethan's pulse tightened slightly. The forest grew denser here, shadows clinging to rock formations. Snow thinned where wind carved through the slope. Ranger slowed near a cluster of broken timber supports that once framed the mine entrance. He stopped, then began digging, hard, not random scraping, focused. He clawed at a specific patch of frozen earth beside a rusted metal beam half buried in snow. Ethan crouched. "What is it?" Ranger ignored the question, digging deeper until his paws struck something solid beneath the soil. Ethan stepped closer and brushed aside snow with his gloved hands. A dark edge appeared. Plastic. He cleared more earth, revealing a small waterproof pouch, mud-stained but intact. It had been buried deliberately, deep enough to conceal, shallow enough to retrieve. Ethan pulled it free. Ranger stepped back, but did not look away. Inside the pouch was a compact GPS tracker, older model, scratched along the casing but operational. Its battery indicator flickered faintly when Ethan pressed the power button. He frowned. "This isn't yours," he murmured. The screen lit up, coordinates, a list of timestamps, and a name embedded in the device's startup file. Caleb Mercer. The name landed heavier than expected. Ethan stared at it for several seconds, trying to place it. Mercer. Then memory surfaced. Caleb Mercer had been a federal tactical operations agent, assigned to the M17K9 unit 3 years ago. Tall, lean build, early 30s. Dark hair always kept short enough to avoid regulation complaints. Quiet, observant, not the loud type. He had earned respect quickly, not because he demanded it, but because he listened. Ethan remembered reading about Mercer's death in a regional briefing. Official report. Fatal accident during a mountain reconnaissance mission. Slipped on unstable rock near a restricted mining zone. Body recovered days later. Closed case. Ethan glanced around the abandoned mine. Accident, he muttered. He scrolled through the device's data. The final coordinates recorded before the tracker stopped transmitting were here. Exactly here. Not on a mountain trail. Not near a random rock slide. At this mine. His jaw tightened. Ranger stepped closer to him and nudged the device lightly with his nose. "You knew," Ethan said quietly. The shepherd's gaze held steady. "This wasn't random. This wasn't instinct. This was intent. You brought me here." A chill moved down Ethan's spine, not from the cold. He scanned the area again. No immediate signs of disturbance. But snow concealed much. "Why bury this?" he murmured. If Mercer had died accidentally, there would be no reason to hide a tracker. Official teams would have retrieved it, unless someone didn't want those coordinates known. The wind shifted. Ranger's head snapped up, not toward the mine entrance, toward the tree line. Ethan followed the line of sight. Far beyond the outer edge of the clearing, partially obscured by branches, stood a figure, still, watching. Distance made details difficult, but the outline was unmistakable. Male, medium build, dark jacket, hat pulled low. He did not move closer. He did not retreat. He simply stood. Ethan's posture shifted automatically. Shoulders squared, breath slowing, weight shifting onto the balls of his feet. "Stay," he murmured to Ranger. Ranger did not growl. He did something more unsettling. He froze. Every muscle in his body tightened, ears pinned slightly backward, not in fear, but in recognition. A low vibration rolled from his chest. Not warning, response. Ethan felt it instantly. "You know him." The figure in the distance shifted his weight slightly, one foot grinding into snow. Then he turned. Not hurried, not startled. He walked back into the trees. Gone. Ethan remained still for a full 10 seconds before moving. "Easy," he whispered. Ranger's eyes remained locked on the direction the man had vanished. "He's been here before," Ethan said. Ranger's nostrils flared. He took one step forward, then stopped himself, as if awaiting instruction. Ethan exhaled slowly. This wasn't just about a lost canine. This was about a dead agent whose last known location contradicted official records, and someone had just confirmed they were not alone in discovering it. Ethan slipped the GPS device back into its pouch and secured it inside his jacket. "We're not staying here," he said. Ranger didn't argue. They moved carefully back through the trees, Ethan scanning every movement in the forest's periphery. Halfway down the slope, Ethan noticed something else. Boot prints. Fresh. Not from yesterday. Not from the truck's path. These were closer to the mine entrance, overlapping faint, older tracks. The same tread pattern as the man in the distance, following the perimeter, watching. Ranger's growl returned, softer this time. "He tracked you here," Ethan murmured. The shepherd's ears twitched, but he didn't run. He stayed at Ethan's side, protective. Returning to the cabin took longer than usual. Ethan didn't rush. He felt eyes on his back the entire way. When they reached the clearing, Ethan paused and scanned the dirt road again. Empty. Too empty. Inside the cabin, he locked the door behind them. He placed the GPS device on the kitchen table and stared at it. Caleb Mercer. Declared dead by accident. Last known coordinates at the abandoned mine. Hidden tracker. Unknown man observing. Ranger lay near the door again, but not in his previous position. Now he positioned himself between Ethan and the window, guarding differently. Not just the door, the perimeter. "You weren't running," Ethan said quietly. He crouched in front of the shepherd. "You were trying to bring someone back." Ranger's gaze softened briefly. Not submissive, not pleading. Resolute, as if the mission had never ended. Ethan leaned back against the wall. For years, he had avoided involvement, avoided responsibility, avoided attachment. But this was not coincidence. This dog had sought him out, led him here, shown him something hidden, and someone else had taken notice. The wind outside intensified, brushing snow against the cabin walls. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. Mercer didn't die by accident. Ranger did not blink. And whoever watched us today knows we know that. Silence settled between them, heavy, focused. Ethan stood and moved toward the rifle mounted discreetly above the fireplace. He did not remove it. He simply checked its position. Then he returned to the table and studied the GPS data again. One coordinate blinked faintly, archived but intact. There were more entries before the final timestamp, more locations, all within a 2-mile radius of the mine. Ranger rose and approached slowly. He placed one paw gently on Ethan's knee. Not restless, steady. Ethan met his gaze. "You're not done," he said. The shepherd's ears lifted, and for the first time since the canyon, Ethan understood something clearly. Ranger wasn't looking for safety. He was looking for justice. Outside, somewhere beyond the tree line, a man who believed the past was buried stood reconsidering that assumption. Inside the cabin, a former Marine who had spent years running from responsibility felt something shift. This wasn't about attachment. It was about unfinished truth. And truth had teeth. The drive into town felt longer than usual. Ethan rarely left the mountains unless supplies ran low, and even then he moved quickly, head down, transactions brief. Durango's main street was quiet in winter, storefront windows reflecting a muted sky. The Animas River ran dark beside the road, indifferent to human secrets. Ranger sat upright in the passenger seat of Ethan's old Ford truck, posture composed despite the unfamiliar environment. His amber eyes tracked movement outside the window, cars passing, pedestrians crossing, a child dragging a red sled across the sidewalk. He did not pant. He did not whine. He observed. Ethan glanced at him once. "You've been here before," he said under his breath. Ranger's ears twitched, but he did not look away from the street. They stopped in front of a narrow brick building wedged between a bookstore and a closed antique shop. The sign above the door had once read, "Whitford Investigations," in clean serif letters. Now the paint was chipped, and one corner of the sign sagged slightly. Ethan hesitated before stepping out. He hadn't spoken to Lena Whitford in nearly 3 years. Inside, the office smelled faintly of ink and old paper. File cabinets lined the walls. A corkboard pinned with photographs and clipped articles dominated one side of the room. A single desk lamp cast warm light over scattered documents. Lena Whitford looked up from behind her desk as the bell above the door chimed. She was in her early 40s, tall and angular, with sharp cheekbones and short ash-blonde hair, cut in a practical style that suggested efficiency over vanity. Her eyes were gray, clear and unflinching. She wore a thick wool sweater beneath a charcoal blazer, sleeves rolled to the elbows. A faint scar cut across her left wrist, barely visible unless you knew to look. She did not smile immediately. "Ethan Callaway," she said evenly. "I was beginning to think you'd gone fully feral." He gave a small nod. Still breathing, her gaze shifted to Ranger. The shepherd stood calmly at Ethan's side, head level, body still. "That's not a pet," Lena observed. "No." She leaned back in her chair, studying the dog carefully. "He's evaluating me," she said after a moment. "He does that." Ranger's ears flicked once. Lena stood slowly and approached, stopping just outside arm's reach. She crouched slightly, not submissive, not challenging. Balanced. Ranger's nostrils flared. He held her gaze for 3 steady seconds. Then he shifted his weight, just slightly. Permission. Lena extended a hand. Ranger did not move away. "Working dog," she murmured. "Federal training, if I'm not mistaken." Ethan placed the waterproof pouch on her desk. "I need you to look at something." Lena straightened, skepticism giving way to curiosity. She retrieved a pair of reading glasses from her pocket and powered on the GPS device. The screen flickered. Coordinates populated. She frowned. "Caleb Mercer," Ethan watched her carefully. "You know the name. I reported on his death." Her voice flattened slightly. "Federal tactical agent. Fatal fall near Silver Ridge. Body recovered 2 days later." That's what the report said. Lena scrolled through the GPS logs slowly. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly, subtle tightening around the eyes. "This data wasn't recovered during the official investigation," she said quietly. "It was buried." Her head lifted. "Buried?" "At the abandoned mine above the ridge." She looked at Ranger. "He led you there." Ethan didn't answer. Lena returned her focus to the timestamps. "They claimed Mercer slipped on unstable terrain at approximately 1400 hours, she murmured, reading aloud. "But this log shows movement inside the mine shaft for nearly 4 hours after that." Ethan felt something cold settle into place. "Inside?" he repeated. "Yes." Lena turned the screen toward him. "See this pattern? He enters the mine at 1317 hours. Signal moves along interior grid lines. Depth readings increase." "Meaning?" "He wasn't near a cliff. He was underground." She tapped another entry. "And here, at 1742 hours, the signal stops abruptly." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Battery died?" "No." Lena shook her head slowly. "Manual shutdown." Silence filled the office. Ranger stood motionless beside Ethan, ears angled forward. Lena removed her glasses and leaned back in her chair. "The autopsy report had inconsistencies," she said after a moment. "Blunt force trauma consistent with a fall, but the timeline never aligned cleanly. There were contusions inconsistent with a single impact." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You think he was beaten?" "I think," she said carefully, "that the narrative was convenient." She rose and crossed to the corkboard on the wall. She pulled down a faded photograph of Caleb Mercer. The image showed a tall, lean man in his early 30s, dark hair cut close, eyes alert but kind. He stood beside a German shepherd, same coat pattern, same steady posture. "Ranger." "You recognize him," Lena said quietly. Ranger stepped forward. He did not bark. He pressed his nose against the edge of the photograph. Ethan felt the air thin in his lungs. "That's his canine," Lena continued. "Unit M17. Ethan glanced at Ranger. "After Mercer's death," Lena said, "the dog was listed as reassigned pending evaluation." "Reassigned where?" "That's the problem." She tapped a folder on her desk. "There is no record of reassignment. Ranger's file ends the same day Mercer's does." Ethan's voice lowered. "Disappeared." "Yes." Lena returned to her desk and opened a separate folder labeled M17 Internal Review. "Mercer had been investigating procurement discrepancies before he died," she said. "Specifically, missing tactical equipment." "What kind?" "Military-grade communication devices, tracking collars, and trained canine units." Ethan's stomach tightened. "Sold?" "Likely." Lena's eyes hardened. Black market interest in tactical dogs has increased in the last decade. Criminal organizations pay high sums for animals trained in detection, pursuit, and combat compliance. Ranger stood very still. "He found something," Ethan said. "Yes." Lena tapped another page. "Several canine units under M17 were reported injured or retired within a 6-month period. Yet none were transferred through official channels. Meaning? They vanished." Silence settled again. Ethan's mind moved quickly now. The mine. "Yes." "You think it was a holding site?" "It fits." Lena folded her arms. "Remote, difficult access, limited oversight." Ranger shifted slightly. Ethan glanced at him. "You weren't lost," he murmured. Lena studied the dog. "He didn't disappear after Mercer's death," she said softly. "He escaped." Ethan looked at her sharply. "You think Mercer sent him away?" "Or released him," she replied. "If Mercer realized he wouldn't survive." The image formed slowly in Ethan's mind. Mercer inside the mine, discovering something, shutting off the GPS manually, releasing Ranger, protecting him. Ranger's breathing deepened slightly, but he did not break posture. "He went back," Ethan said. "To the last place he saw his handler," Lena finished. Outside the office window, a dark vehicle passed slowly along the street. Ranger's head snapped toward it instantly, Lena noticed. "You're being followed," she said calmly. "Since yesterday." Her expression did not change. "Then they know you have that device." Ethan felt a familiar steadiness settle over him. "They watched us at the mine." Lena nodded once. "Mercer didn't die by accident," she said firmly now. "He uncovered a trafficking operation involving tactical canine units and military equipment. Someone silenced him." Ranger's tail remained low, controlled, not reactive, focused. "And Ranger," Lena added, glancing at the dog, "was never missing." Ethan's voice lowered. He was returning to the last known truth. The office felt smaller now. He had avoided involvement for years, avoided digging, avoided responsibility. But Ranger had brought him here, not randomly, deliberately. "Why me?" Ethan asked quietly. Lena studied him. "Because you're the kind of man who doesn't ignore things once you see them." He almost laughed at that, but he didn't. Ranger stepped closer and placed his head lightly against Ethan's leg. Not seeking comfort, anchoring. Ethan rested a hand on the shepherd's neck. "You weren't running," he said softly. "You were leading me back." Outside, the dark vehicle slowed briefly at the corner before continuing down the street. Lena's eyes tracked it carefully. "This won't stay buried," she said. "No," Ethan agreed. He picked up the GPS device and slipped it back into his jacket. "This isn't about closure." "It never was," Lena replied. Ranger stood tall now, wound forgotten, posture steady. He wasn't a stray. He wasn't a survivor of coincidence. He was a witness. And he had returned to the place where his handler disappeared, not to grieve, but to finish something. Ethan met Lena's gaze. "Show me everything you have on Mercer." Lena nodded once. The accident wasn't an accident. The report wasn't truth. And Ranger hadn't gotten lost. He had come home to the last place his handler stood. The mountains did not forgive hesitation. Ethan knew that as he stood at the edge of the abandoned mine entrance 2 nights later, breath fogging in the cold air, this time he had come prepared. A tactical flashlight clipped to his vest, rope secured around his waist, gloves reinforced, a compact sidearm holstered at his hip, not for hunting, for survival. Ranger stood beside him, posture tall and unwavering. The bandage had been removed, the wound still tender but closing cleanly. His coat caught the moonlight, sable and black blending into shadow. He did not tremble. He leaned forward, ready. "You don't get reckless," Ethan murmured. "We do this smart." The boards that once sealed the mine had been partially pried loose. Not old damage, recent. The wood edges were sharp where splinters had broken clean. Someone had entered within days. Ethan pulled the remaining board aside and slipped through first, flashlight beam cutting into darkness. The air inside was colder than outside, thick, damp, metallic. The smell of old earth mixed with something else, gun oil. Ranger stepped in quietly behind him. The beam of light traced uneven stone walls and collapsed supports. Dust hung suspended in the narrow tunnel. "This isn't abandoned," Ethan whispered. They moved deeper. The ground shifted from loose gravel to uneven wooden planks bridging shallow shafts. The boards creaked under Ethan's weight. Ranger placed each paw deliberately, distributing his weight with careful precision. Halfway down the main shaft, Ethan noticed something on the ground. A crumpled dog food bag, commercial brand, recently opened. Beside it, empty shell casings, 9mm, 3 of them, fresh. He crouched, touching one lightly, still faintly warm. "They're still using this place," he said quietly. Ranger's ears angled sharply forward. A faint clicking sound echoed deeper in the tunnel. Ethan froze. Not mechanical decay, electronic. He scanned upward. Near the ceiling beam, partially concealed by dust and shadow, a small dome glinted. Camera. A hidden lens aimed directly toward the entrance. "They're watching," Ethan muttered. He stepped backward, slowly, pulling Ranger with him. The ground beneath him shifted. One of the planks gave way. The crack was sharp and sudden. The board split under his boot, sending him plunging downward into darkness. Instinct kicked in, but gravity was faster. He dropped several feet before his hands caught the edge of another unstable beam. His flashlight clattered against stone, beams spinning wildly. Below him, a deep shaft yawned, at least 20 feet further down into blackness. His fingers slipped against dust-coated wood. For one breathless second, he was back in Fallujah, concrete giving way, Cole's fingers slipping, the freeze, the paralysis. But this time, fabric tightened at his shoulder. Ranger. The shepherd had lunged forward, teeth clamping firmly into the collar of Ethan's jacket. Muscles coiled, paws braced against solid ground. He pulled, hard. Ethan's arm trembled violently as he fought to regain grip. "Hold," he whispered, not to himself. Ranger's growl deepened, not aggressive but straining. The dog shifted his weight backward, inch by inch, dragging Ethan upward just enough for him to secure his elbow against stable timber. Ethan kicked against the wall and surged upward with everything left in his arms. The broken board collapsed entirely, crashing into the shaft below. Ethan rolled onto solid ground, chest heaving. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then Ranger released his jacket. He stood over Ethan, breathing heavy but steady. "You didn't let go," Ethan said hoarsely. Ranger nudged his shoulder once, sharp, almost annoyed, as if to say, "Focus." Ethan pushed himself upright. "I won't freeze," he muttered. He retrieved the flashlight and turned it off. If there's a camera, they saw that. And if they saw that, they would move. The sound of boots scraping stone echoed faintly behind them. Not close, but approaching. Ethan pulled Ranger into a side alcove, just off the main tunnel. He killed all light and pressed against the cold wall. Footsteps grew louder. 2 sets. Low voices murmured. The first man stepped into view, flashlight beam cutting across the broken planks. He was broad-shouldered, mid-40s, shaved head reflecting light, thick beard trimmed close to his jaw. Tactical jacket, boots heavy and deliberate. A pistol hung loosely in his right hand. Behind him stood a thinner man, early 30s, nervous energy in his movements. He wore a dark beanie and scanned constantly, as if expecting something to lunge from the shadows. "They were here," the younger man said. The older one crouched near the fallen plank. "They triggered it." He glanced upward toward the camera lens. "They saw it." The younger man swallowed. "You think it's him?" "Doesn't matter who it is." The older man's voice was calm, controlled, dangerous. "They shouldn't have come back." Ranger's muscles tensed beside Ethan. Ethan placed a hand gently over the shepherd's neck. "Not yet." The older man stood slowly and turned toward the alcove. The beam of his flashlight moved steadily across the walls. then stopped, directly on Ethan's chest. Silence. The younger man raised his weapon instantly. "Well," the older man said softly, "look what we found." Ethan stepped forward slowly, hands visible but close enough to move. "You killed Mercer," he said evenly. The older man smiled faintly. He slipped. 4 hours inside the mine? The smile faded. "You shouldn't dig into things that don't concern you." Ranger stepped forward beside Ethan. The younger man flinched. "That dog." "I know," the older man interrupted. "That's the one." Recognition. Ranger's low growl filled the tunnel. "You remember him," Ethan murmured. The older man raised his pistol slightly. "We tried to put him down." "Stubborn animal." The younger man shifted nervously. "He cost us money." Ethan felt heat rise in his chest, but not panic, not paralysis. The barrel of the pistol aligned with his chest. The moment stretched thin. In Fallujah, he had frozen for half a second too long. This time, he moved first. He lunged sideways just as Ranger exploded forward. The shepherd hit the younger man square in the chest, knocking him backward into the wall. The gun discharged once, bullet ricocheting into stone. Ethan drew his sidearm in one fluid motion and fired once toward the older man's shoulder. The shot connected. The older man staggered, weapon dropping. Ranger pinned the younger man's wrist, teeth clamped firmly but controlled, precisely trained not to crush. "Drop it," Ethan commanded. The older man's face twisted in fury and pain. "This isn't over," he hissed. Ethan stepped forward, kicking the fallen weapon away. "It was over the day you killed him." The tunnel echoed with distant movement. More boots, further back. Reinforcements. "We're leaving," Ethan said sharply. Ranger released the younger man instantly and returned to Ethan's side. They retreated down the tunnel, moving fast but controlled. Gunshots echoed behind them, wild, unfocused. They reached the entrance and burst into cold night air. Ethan didn't stop until they were deep in the tree line. Only then did he pause, chest heaving. Ranger stood tall beside him, eyes burning in the moonlight. "You pulled me out," Ethan said quietly. The shepherd didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. For the first time since the canyon, Ethan felt no freeze, no echo of failure. He had moved. He had chosen action, and Ranger had chosen him. Behind them, the mine loomed in shadow, no longer just a relic of the past, but a crime scene alive with truth. And now, exposed. The mountains were quieter after gunfire. Ethan noticed it the next morning as he stood on the porch of his cabin, watching frost dissolve under weak sunlight. The trees looked the same. The snow lay undisturbed, but something had shifted beneath the surface, like ice cracking far below a frozen lake. Ranger stood in front of the door, not lying down, standing, alert. His silhouette framed against the wooden panels looked almost ceremonial, like a statue carved for vigilance. The wound on his leg had stiffened overnight, but he showed no sign of weakness. His ears angled toward the tree line, nostrils testing the air for movement. "You don't sleep much anymore," Ethan murmured. Ranger did not turn his head. Ethan had not slept either. The confrontation inside the mine replayed in fragments, boots scraping stone, the gunshot echoing, the older man's cold eyes. But unlike Fallujah, the memory did not end in paralysis. This time he had moved. He had acted. He stepped back inside and picked up his phone. 3 missed calls, all from Lena. He called back immediately. She answered on the first ring. "They're already spinning it," she said without greeting. "What?" "The incident at the mine. Local chatter says it was trespassers shooting at private contractors." Ethan's jaw tightened. Contractors. Yes, convenient label. Lena sounded different today, sharper, faster. The controlled calm of a journalist who had decided to stop whispering. "I published it," she said. "The article?" "All of it." Ethan walked to the kitchen table, where the GPS device lay beside his coffee mug. "You're sure? I don't write halfway stories." He could hear typing in the background, keys striking hard. "I cross-referenced the GPS logs, autopsy discrepancies, procurement records, and the mine's ownership structure. It's live." "What's the reaction?" "A lot of noise. But more importantly, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation just issued a statement." Ethan felt his pulse steady. "They're opening a formal inquiry. Outside, Ranger shifted his stance. "You know they'll push back," Ethan said. "I'm counting on it," Lena replied. "Pressure reveals cracks." She paused. "And Ethan, they're not going to ignore you." He glanced at the rifle above the fireplace. "I wasn't planning on hiding." That afternoon, 2 state troopers arrived at the cabin. The first, Sergeant Daniel Reyes, was tall and broad, early 50s, dark hair graying at the temples. His uniform sat naturally on him, like he had worn responsibility for decades. His eyes were steady, thoughtful, not eager to escalate. The second, Deputy Claire Donnelly, younger, late 20s, short auburn hair tucked beneath her hat. She moved with quick precision, observant but respectful. Reyes removed his hat as he stepped onto the porch. "Mr. Calloway." "Sergeant." Reyes's gaze shifted to Ranger. "That him?" "Yes." Ranger did not growl, but he stepped slightly forward, guarding. Reyes nodded once. "We've reviewed the published evidence. We'd like a formal statement." Ethan gestured them inside. Claire's eyes moved over the room carefully. Door locks, windows, sight lines. She noticed everything. Ranger remained between Ethan and the entrance the entire time. Not aggressive, protective. Reyes listened quietly as Ethan described the mine, the men, the camera, the GPS. When Ethan finished, Reyes exhaled slowly. "If even half of this holds under forensic review," he said, "we're looking at organized trafficking, federal assets," Claire added, "and obstruction." Ethan met their gaze. "They'll try to scare you off." Reyes's mouth twitched slightly. "They've already tried." Outside, the low rumble of an engine rolled past the cabin. Not stopping, but slowing. Ranger's body stiffened instantly. Claire noticed. "That vehicle's been circling this area twice today," she said. Reyes stepped to the window and noted the license plate quietly. "They're testing you," he said to Ethan. "Testing. Intimidating." That evening, after the troopers left, Ethan stepped outside to stack firewood. He found something lodged in the cabin door. A folded piece of paper, no envelope. He opened it slowly. "Walk away. You survived one war. Don't start another." The handwriting was deliberate, neat, calm. Ranger stepped up beside him, reading his posture more than the paper. "They think I scare easy," Ethan murmured. Ranger's ears flattened briefly, not in fear, but irritation. Inside, Ethan burned the note in the fireplace. The flames consumed it quickly. He stood there longer than necessary, watching it turn to ash. For years, after returning from overseas, he had avoided confrontation, avoided anything that resembled a battlefield. When conflicts arose, he withdrew, because he had failed once, because freezing had cost someone everything. But now, he had watched Ranger dive into gunfire without hesitation. He had felt fabric tighten in his collar when gravity pulled him toward darkness. The dog had not calculated survival odds. He had acted. That night, the truck returned, closer. Its headlights cut across the cabin walls. This time it stopped, engine idling. Ranger moved immediately, positioning himself squarely in front of the door, shoulders broad, tail low but firm. A silent sentinel. Ethan stepped beside him. The engine revved once, then cut. Footsteps in snow, a knock. Not polite, controlled. Ethan opened the door halfway, hand resting near his holster. The older man from the mine stood there, shoulder bandaged, face pale but composed. He was alone, for now. "You're making this complicated," the man said calmly. "You made it criminal." The man's eyes flicked to Ranger. "That dog cost us millions. That dog had a name." The man's smile thinned. "You think publishing an article protects you?" "No." Ethan stepped fully into the doorway. "I think standing in daylight does." The man studied him. "You walked away from war once," he said softly. "You going to do it again?" The words struck, but did not paralyze. Ethan felt the echo of a younger version of himself, the one who froze under collapsing concrete. He felt it, and then he chose. "No," he said. The man's expression hardened. "You'll regret that." He turned and walked back to his truck. The engine roared to life and disappeared into the night. Ethan remained in the doorway long after the sound faded. Ranger stood unmoving at his side. He could leave. He could pack the truck, disappear into another county, another silence. He had done it before. Isolation was easy. Retreat was familiar. But Mercer had stood alone once, and Ranger had come back. Not for comfort, for truth. Ethan crouched down in front of the shepherd. "You don't run," he said quietly. Ranger's amber eyes locked with his, steady, expectant. Ethan stood slowly and shut the door. "We're not leaving." Ranger exhaled softly and stepped back from the threshold, but did not lie down, still guarding. Outside, the mountains watched without judgment. Inside, a soldier who once believed survival was enough made a different decision. He would not solve this alone. He would not carry it alone. But he would not retreat either. The war he feared had already found him, and this time, he was staying. The truth did not arrive like thunder. It arrived in documents, signed affidavits, confiscated drives, seized bank transfers routed through shell companies that wore clean names and dirty intentions. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation worked quickly once the first arrest broke the silence. The older man from the mine, Victor Hale, was not a contractor. He was a logistics coordinator embedded inside a federal procurement network, a trusted position, a decorated resume, a quiet betrayal. The younger accomplice turned state's witness within 48 hours. His name was Aaron Pike, 29, former military police discharged under disciplinary review. Nervous disposition, sharp eyes that never settled. He confessed quickly when confronted with financial records and surveillance logs. The trafficking ring was real. Tactical K-9 units labeled "retired" had been diverted and sold to private buyers with criminal ties, cartels, organized theft networks, private militias. Equipment meant for law enforcement rerouted into underground auctions. Caleb Mercer had discovered discrepancies in transport logs. He had entered the mine following a lead, and someone he trusted followed him there. Not an accident, a staged fall, a body moved, a narrative written. The investigation concluded within weeks, but it felt like years. Lena's articles spread beyond Durango. National outlets picked up the story. Questions were asked in federal committees. The words "oversight failure" echoed across broadcast panels. But the heart of it all remained quiet. One man, one dog, and a promise broken. On a cold afternoon, Ethan stood beside the Animas River. Snow lay thick along its banks, untouched except for 2 sets of footprints leading toward the water's edge. Ranger stood ahead of him, coat gleaming under winter light, breath rising in soft clouds. His posture was relaxed now, not rigid, free. A small ceremony had taken place earlier that morning inside the Durango Municipal Building. Sergeant Reyes had attended in uniform. Deputy Donnelly stood near the back, her usually reserved expression softened. A federal liaison had presented a formal recognition. Ranger, Unit M17, had been officially reinstated in record as a K-9 who served with distinction, and whose actions contributed to the exposure of criminal misconduct within procurement operations. A framed certificate, a polished collar tag engraved with his name. It felt small compared to what had been taken, but it was something. Ethan had stood silently through the presentation. He did not speak to reporters. He did not accept praise. When asked why he became involved, he answered simply, "No one gets left behind." The words felt different now. He knelt down in the snow near the riverbank. The water moved slow and steady, carrying shards of ice like drifting glass. "Mercer should have been here," he said quietly. Ranger turned and walked toward him. Slow, measured. He stopped inches away. For a long moment, neither moved. Ethan reached out, brushing fingers along the shepherd's thick fur. The dog's coat was warm despite the cold, dense, strong, alive. "I wasn't there for Cole," Ethan murmured. The name hovered in the air like breath. "I froze." The river did not judge. Ranger stepped closer. Then, without command, without signal, he placed his head gently against Ethan's chest, right over his heart. Not random, not restless, deliberate. Ethan felt the weight of it, the steady pressure, the warmth. For years he had believed something inside him had stopped beating the day he failed to reach for his friend in time, that a part of him remained buried beneath dust and regret. But now, under the firm weight of a loyal animal who had crossed mountains to finish his handler's mission, he felt something shift. Not dramatic, not loud, just real. He wrapped both arms around Ranger's neck and held him there. Snow fell lightly around them, And for the first time in years, Ethan did not feel like a survivor. He felt present. The cabin changed slowly after that, not in structure, in atmosphere. Ethan took down the small wooden box from the top shelf of his closet, a box he had not opened in nearly a decade. Inside lay his Marine Corps badge, wrapped carefully in cloth. It had remained hidden after his discharge, tucked away like something he no longer believed he deserved. He carried it into the living room and stood before the empty wall above the fireplace. For a long moment, he hesitated. Then he mounted it there, centered, visible, not as a symbol of glory, but of continuity. Ranger lay on the floor nearby, watching without intrusion. That night, Ethan went to bed without leaving the hallway light on. Ranger followed him, not to the door this time, to the foot of the bed. He circled once and lay down across the threshold of the room, head resting on paws, eyes half closed, guarding, but relaxed. Ethan lay on his back, staring at the ceiling. He waited for the usual, the jolting wake-up, the flash of collapsing buildings, the phantom weight of a fallen comrade slipping from his grip. But sleep came differently. It arrived gently, and when he stirred once near dawn, it was not from fear. It was from the sound of steady breathing at the foot of the bed. Weeks passed. The arrests expanded. Charges were filed. Victor Hale's internal communications exposed layers of complicity. 2 additional procurement officers were indicted. Financial trails traced back to buyers now under separate investigation. The mine was sealed permanently. A memorial plaque bearing Caleb Mercer's name was placed at the entrance, not under the false cause of death previously recorded, but beneath the truth. Agent Caleb Mercer, fallen in the line of duty. Lena attended the small unveiling ceremony. She stood slightly apart from the crowd, coat collar raised against the wind, gray eyes steady. When Ethan approached, she gave him a nod. "You stayed," she said. "So did you." She glanced at Ranger. He never left. No, he hadn't. On the first heavy snowfall of January, Ethan stepped outside just before sunrise. The world had transformed overnight into white silence. Ranger stood beside him, tail lifting slightly. "Go on," Ethan said softly. Ranger didn't need encouragement twice. He launched forward into the open clearing, paws kicking up arcs of powder, body cutting through snow like a shadow freed from burden. He ran, not with urgency, but with joy. He leapt over drifts, skidded playfully along the slope, circled back and darted away again. His movements were fluid, powerful, unrestricted. Ethan watched from the porch, hands in pockets, breath steady. The ache that once lived permanently behind his ribs had dulled, not erased, but softened into something survivable. Ranger sprinted toward him once more and stopped just short, snow dusting his muzzle. Ethan knelt, brushing it away. "You did what I couldn't," he said quietly. Ranger tilted his head. No judgment in his gaze, only presence. The mountains stood tall around them. The Animas River moved steadily below. And in the stillness of a Colorado morning, a man who once believed his heart had stopped beating on a battlefield realized it had only been waiting. Ranger bounded away again, disappearing briefly behind a snowbank before emerging once more in brilliant motion. Ethan stood and watched, not as a soldier weighed down by ghosts, not as a man running from memory, but as someone who had learned, when a life reaches for you, you don't let go. Some people will say this story was about justice. Some will say it was about courage. But maybe it was something quieter than that. Maybe it was about how God does not waste pain. A dog left for dead finds his way back to the only place that holds the truth. A soldier who believed his heart stopped beating on a battlefield learns that it was only waiting to be awakened. We call it coincidence, but sometimes it feels like guidance. Maybe God knew that Ranger needed someone who understood loss, and maybe Ethan needed a reason to believe that no life is ever truly forgotten. Because the miracle was not just that the truth came to light. The miracle was that 2 broken beings found each other at the exact moment they were ready to heal. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments. Do you believe God sends companions into our lives when we need them most? If you believe no one should ever be left behind, type Amen. Please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel for more true stories of courage, loyalty, and faith. Tonight, I pray that wherever you are reminded that even in the darkest valleys, you are not alone. and that sometimes the miracle does not come with thunder. Sometimes it arrives quietly, with 4 paws, and a heart that refuses to give up.